and welcome to the AI for Good All Year, Always Online. My name is Xenia Fontaine from the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, and I have the privilege of introducing today's webinar, Data Ecosystems, a Stepping Stone for Sustainable Development Goals, which is organized in partnership with Capgemini, our gold sponsor. Now, the ITU is the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies, and we are also the organizer of the AI for Good in partnership with 38 UN sister agencies, ASEAN, and co-convened with Switzerland. And with that, I think now it's time for me to hand over to our first moderators, Anne-Laure Thiellon, who leads Perform AI, Capgemini's Artificial Intelligence and Analytics Group offer, and Pierre-Adrien Anania, AI for Public Sector Group offer leader at Capgemini. Over to you, Pierre-Adrien and Anne-Laure.
Thanks a lot for joining. Very happy to once again in this year tackle the topic of data and the intelligent use of data. We have this year again a wide range of speakers that will tackle with us the conversation and cover best practices, stories, but also the state of maturity that is today. With no further ado, let's just take a look at what we are going to talk today together with Anne-Laure on the next slide. Yes, in a first part, we will have an introduction where we will actually also be sharing the virtual stage with Barbara Ubaldi from OECD and Eric White from the World Economic Forum, before we then split into various streams that are for 1 hour and that are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Decent work, SDG 8, climate action, SDG 13, smart communities and cities, SDG 11, and good health and well-being, SDG 3. In there, we will be hearing about their stories, about the way that today data is shared already. And for this, very honored, Anne-Laure, to give you the floor in order to a deep dive right into the topic that will occupy us for the next hours. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Pierre-Adrien. So hopefully everybody can hear me well. So I wanted to introduce and kickstart this session by defining what we mean by collaborative data ecosystems, because it sounds a bit specific, right? So those are partnerships between organizations to share and manage relevant data and insights to create new value for all participants that they wouldn't be able to create only by themselves. So concretely, what do we mean by new value? Well, it could be new products, new services, or experiences that you couldn't provide with only your own data. So a good example of this is all the connected products that you find if you're connected with the Apple Health ecosystems. Another example that I believe we will describe today is Future for Care, where you have 4 companies coming together, so telco, insurance, and life sciences, forming a business partnership, including data sets, in order to support the creation of a specific e-health startup accelerator in Europe for new products and services to be created. The new value that you can find also with data ecosystems, it can also be found in seeing what others are seeing in order to better run your operations. So as an example, you can look at Melody.eu initiative, where pharma companies are sharing insights on drug discovery with the common goal of accelerating the time to market for safer drugs. Or again, you can find other examples in consumer products or industrial companies partnering with suppliers and logistics partners in order to further optimize the potential disruption or risks into their supply chain. Pierre-Adrien, I don't know if you want to bring just a few other examples of value created by data ecosystems.
Yes, I will. You see, for example, the stories around on Dijon, where we brought together the data of a whole city, because a city is made by very different corners, water utilities, electricity, but also citizen data and administration data. And you see also the work we have done for the European Data Sharing Center, where we bring together different stakeholders to work on a common data set, to work on common knowledge in order to gain more insights simply.
Exactly. Thank you, Pierre-Adrien. So on the next slide, the message really that we want you to get is we consider that collaborative data ecosystems, data sharing, data collaboration, it's actually the next and biggest evolution stage of what we all do on data and AI. So if you think about it, it's the kind of the same evolution moment than what the internet did to commerce. It's the combination actually of internet, software as a service, big data and AI at scale that now allows organizations of all sectors to expand from looking only at the data that they own within their four walls, but to actively seek partnerships to get access to outside-in insights from other organizations in the same sector or other organizations in different sectors, but sitting in the same end customer or citizen value chain than them. And of course, it has a lot of implications on how, as an organization, you succeed at truly managing data as a business asset, sorry. How do you collaborate on those data products internally and externally? And how you ultimately build those new products, services, experiences, augmented insights, not only on the view that within your four walls, but based also on what others are seeing as well. On the next slide, just to reinforce that, so since it's such a big shift, we have done a bit of research to understand where organizations were overall with data sharing and data collaboration. And we published a specific piece of research from our Capgemini Research Institute back in July this year called Data Sharing Masters. So let me share with you a few insights, and then I will encourage you to download the report and read through. So first of all, remember what I was telling you on these augmented insights. So say you're setting aside, the creation of new products and services for a moment, and you are only looking at running your operations better. Like, for example, improving citizen satisfaction by 15%, improving productivity by 14%, or reducing cost by 11%. This already can represent a potential incremental revenue impact of 9%. Just that, without creating anything new. But further than that, when we actually examine the financial performance of organizations that engage extensively in data sharing and data collaboration, we found that they had twice the market capitalization versus average and 14 times the fixed asset turnover. And I will just conclude by another last number that is this time not coming from our research, but from McKinsey, which estimates that by 2025, up to 30% of the global economy will be based on interconnected business models, which will be powered by data collaboration. So it's really big. The opportunity is really big. So with that, I will hand it over back to Pierre so that we can deep dive on some more examples on how to make it happen.
Merci. And I just have a few statements here basically to pass. Because what is it now exactly? What is this sharing about, and where does it have application? A few stories you heard already. We have, for example, the European data portal, where we bring together over 1 million data sets and over 80 catalog of data. We have the Health Data Hub in France, where we help the government to build use cases in the area of sharing, data sharing in health, where basically we help to accelerate innovation, but also to get into this discussion of what we can do with the intelligent use of data. On Dijon, I have talked already, and if you look at the bottom part, there is a lot more. Basically, any organization that sits on data and knows, okay, but there is also this data out there, is a case for data sharing. I was in the past weeks in discussion with a few welfare organizations where basically employment services were thinking about how can we collaborate more with hospitals or with cities in order to understand better the real-time ad hoc dynamics of a job market because of the pandemic. And so actually, if you go to the next slide, the value and the impact of data sharing is very clear. you multiply the data insights for governments and public services. You get a common view on something that is not unidimensional, but that you need to approach from very different parts, from the technological, from the societal, but also from the legitimacy part. And that's exactly where you can get more insights to leverage commonly without losing, of course, the ownership of your data. This leads, of course, to decreased time and cost to serve, but also you can really engage with the citizen, because we are seeing more and more that citizen data, or that citizens are not the sole consumer of data, but that they are more and more also producer of data. When we interact with the city administration, or where we go out and we take the bus or the bike, or we walk to the office, this is data that is giving us insights about what our preferences are. And of course, real-time assessment, I think we will talk about that in the health SDG session. Not trying to do some publicity there, but basically how telco organizations and governments and hospitals work together to tackle very clearly the pandemic and the anomalies. Of course, unleashing data potential comes with great responsibility. And at the bottom, you can see a few of the issues that we see, a few of the open issues. That's why in the preparation calls with the speakers we will hear from today, what I really appreciated and really liked was that the topic was not, okay, let's show the best practices and how everything works well. No, we are at the beginning of this journey, and we are at the beginning of even understanding what data we sit on and in which quality this data is. So it is coming with a question of data privacy. How do we share personal data? Or how do we share attributes from personal data that are important for the potential of our use cases? How do we make data collaboration efficient? How do we deal with the data ownership management so that everyone can collaborate without losing ownership of their own data? And last but not least, how do we collaborate with a target of increased revenue and purpose? And these questions must be operationalized. Organizations are on it. And therefore, I think the main thesis we really want to bring forward today, whatever the issues and difficulties is on the next slide, that clearly the global quest for achieving sustainable development goals requires this transversal and international collaboration in managing data. And before we move towards the different streams and the specific SDGs that we want to focus on today, we have really the honor already in the plenary to tackle this topic with two speakers that I can ask now to share their camera. On the one hand, Barbara Ubaldi from the OECD, and on the other hand, Eric White from the World Economic Forum. And maybe in a very quick, brief pitch as first question, I would like to ask you to present yourself. Barbara, you have been working on quite a few checkpoints of the digital pathway on e-government. I saw on knowledge management as well. You have been at the UN. You also have started then at the OECD, and you lead the open data and data-driven government stream there. What is it you do, and what is your touching point today with data sharing and data ecosystem?
Hi, Pierre Mercier. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for having invited us to share a little bit our thoughts on this topic, which is very core to the work we do on public governance at the OECD, because we do acknowledge that the idea of building data ecosystems within the public sector and in the broader context, economic and societal context, is not an option, but is a priority. If we really want to make sure governments are up to the expectations to provide services that respond to the needs of the users. And I would like to just focus my introductory thoughts on a key piece that the OECD produced in the past month, which is an OECD recommendation on enhanced access and sharing of data. The recommendation is the highest normative instrument that the organization produces. This is soft law, but once the governments, members of the organization adopt a recommendation, they commit to implement the provisions of the recommendation. And why is this recommendation, in our view, so important? First of all, this is a recommendation that was the product of 3 different groups within the OECD. The ones ourselves working on public governance, the ones working on digital economy, and the ones working on open science. And the key message given by the recommendation is indeed that there are data which are owned in the sense produced, collected, generated by the public sector, some by the scientific community, and some by the private sector that need to be opened up because they potentially have a great value in relation to producing public goods. In that sense, therefore, the call is for the different parts of the ecosystem to acknowledge this, to work together, and perhaps to put public good and sustainable development goals are the, let's say, we all know, the most effective way to acknowledge that there's a public good that goes beyond interests, which are individual interests and which are interests of specific actors. So getting together to identify what are the actions that we all can do as part of the ecosystem to open up key data sets. Now, the recommendation also acknowledges that this is not easy. Like you said, one thing is the ambition of making it happen. And another thing is the acknowledgement and awareness on some of the obstacles that resist. And without going too much in detail on the provisions, I'll be very happy to share the link for everybody to read the recommendation. I just would like to highlight the 3 main, let's say, themes that we think are areas on which we all together need to work. First of all, there is the need to reinforce trust across the ecosystem. If we want all the actors, public, private, and scientific community to actually work together towards this common goal and open up their data, there's a need to foster the trust among all the different actors, and having a whole of government approach and identifying what are the benefits that can be achieved, protecting rights and balancing with the risks is essential. Second, there's a need of stimulating investments because we know that open data doesn't come for free for nobody. So coming up with clear business models, sustainable business models, and identifying that there's a market intended as a set of benefits that can be achieved is essential. Third, there's a need to foster a responsible access and sharing and reuse of data, because one of the limitations that exists at the moment in making sure that these data ecosystems grow and flourish is the also concern about the capacity of the different actors to access and share data in a responsible manner. For example, acknowledging and tackling the ethical risks associated with the access and sharing and reuse of data. And the topic of the webinar is key because connecting data with AI agendas is a priority also to tackle all the ethical concerns. So I stop here, but this to say that we really think that there's a world of actions that can be taken to foster access and sharing and engage the different parts of the ecosystem.
Merci beaucoup. Yes, thanks a lot for this. And I see already that some participants want the OECD paper and a recommendation paper. Thanks a lot. Eric, you at the World Economic Forum, you lead the Tech for SDGs stream. Can you introduce yourself and tell us more about your vision in regards to data sharing and maybe also the link to the SDGs?
Okay, merci beaucoup, Pierre-Adrien, and tout le monde à Capgemini. Hello, everybody. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces from our Geneva community here that I haven't seen in a long time. So, hello. My name's Eric White. I head tech for the SDGs at the World Economic Forum. This is a new role. New for me in that the last 3 years I was running our tech industry vertical, sort of purely in the industry space, but also new for the forum, because we have until this point treated sort of tech for good in a not in a holistic way. So my job is to find the right way to coordinate all of the work we're doing on this topic throughout the organization, leverage the assets we have in terms of relationships, voice, expertise, and capabilities on the ground through our Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution centers, and find a way to move forward on the SDGs through the deployment of digital technology. So what do we see as the opportunity here? I think the first thing is that I think this is a really exciting time to be working on data for good. And I think it's for 2 reasons. I think one is that just in the last couple of years, technology has given us a way to get through what has perennially been the biggest stumbling block to data collaboration, which was always around risk if something goes wrong. If I'm a telco and I let you access my data, if you're a government, and you misuse it for repression, or if your cybersecurity isn't very good and it gets out, that's a risk I have to consider. But there's lots of technologies now that either allow data to be encrypted while it's being processed rather than transited or stored, that's called confidential compute. There's a lot of technologies that allow data to be analyzed without actually being shared. There's possibilities to move AI algorithms around to different data sets and train them on different data sets without letting the AI algorithm owner actually see the data. We call these privacy enhancing technology. Well, privacy enhancing technology is a cybersecurity term. So technologies that build trust in data collaboration. And there's lots of them that businesses themselves are just getting comfortable with and starting to use. And I think there's a lot of room for public-private collaboration around these technologies. The other reason I think is an exciting time is because of what's happened in the private sector due to COVID. We've seen this at the World Economic Forum, is that every business in every sector is completely rethinking their business model. They all realize they have to be very nimble, very digital, and they need to create new value very soon. This has become a really big buzzword. How are they going to go digital and create a new value proposition that allows them to stay relevant? And as they're doing this, they're exploring ways to collaborate on data. And as the private sector gets more comfortable collaborating on data, they're going to be much more comfortable doing it with public sector and sort of international organizations, so as to do good in the world. So one example I'd like to highlight that we're working on in 2030 Vision, it's something called the One Map Coalition. We just announced at COP. The idea behind One Map is literally one map. If you're a government that's trying to plan adaptation, how can you get access to all the information you need? How can you see the farmer survey data overlaid with geospatial data, overlaid with in situ sensor data, overlaid with sort of farmer roster data that you get from governments, and do this in a way that makes everybody that's party to the collaboration feel like their data is secure and have access to the insights in a way that they need. So there's several layers. There's a layer on data agency and consent management that's important for the especially at the farmer level. There's a layer on leveraging these trust building technologies that allow you to deepen insight while maintaining the right of privacy. There's a layer on shared standards and architectures. And then there's a layer on new services that will be built on top of this architecture. So I think this kind of thing is the way forward. And I'll pause there.
Merci beaucoup. I would just like to come to what you have both described as there is a system change happening right now, and that needs to happen. One question that I have is in regards to global local perspectives. How to marry? I mean, we have data strategies being published in nearly all countries, also AI strategies, sometimes also on ministerial level or on city level. So plenty of thought leadership and of vision, ambitions being stated. But how to marry local activities where the use case also are happening and global perspectives, and here also global policy. Are we on the right track? Are system changes still needed that are not undertaken yet? How do you see this? The question goes to both of you.
I'll let Barbara go first, as I think the OECD is closer to the policy landscape.
Thank you. That's a key question. That's a key question, and I think it's very relevant, first of all, when we talk about the levels within governments, within countries, between central government and local governments. Oftentimes, there are very interesting examples happening at the local level that don't reach the national policies. And I think the type of dialogue and the ecosystem that happens within countries needs to be essential. Why? Because when we work with delegates responsible for open data policies in their own administrations, they keep saying they need to have use cases still after many years of investments on open data to convince the decision makers. The COVID-19 pandemic outbreak happened overnight, And it did not happen overnight from a health point of view, but it did from a policy point of view and from an administration point of view. And still, implementers of open data policies at the national level had problems convincing the responsible ministers to open up data they were holding that could be used by the private sector to produce tools, solutions, services, as you mentioned. So they keep saying that they have problems convincing their leaders in investing, continuing investing on open data policies, whereby at the local level, there are many concrete examples and use cases that can be utilized to give visibility of the real reason why it's important to have policies that support the release of open data. So I think the first level of connection, global, local, is between the central level of government and the local level of government. But second, there's a higher call, I think, for connecting the global meant beyond national borders and the national administrations. There are common needs that citizens, people have across countries. They need to be the priority for collaborations between public and public-private, the civic and the public to happen. Those needs are common. So I think by putting the common needs of people across borders on the table, we can all together make sure that governments agree or come to a common understanding of the need of releasing specific data sets that, if interoperable between countries, can actually help address common needs. And second, they can also help strengthening the collaborations that Eric was talking about between the private and the public. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated quite clearly in France, where I live. It was a very clear case of how it was somebody from the civil society who actually utilized the data released by the government to produce an application that made all of us feel more comfortable in identifying where we could go get vaccinated. That also helped improving the availability of the data and the quality of the data. So definitely, I think the idea of having a common agenda, for example, or a common agreement on key data sets that, if opened up at the different actors, can help address needs that are common. It's probably a way to start advancing this collaboration also between the global and the local. That is not a reality always.
And maybe, Eric, we have mentioned now the governments. What I remember from successful data projects is often that they federate data just as much as they federate the actors behind the data. Now we have in an ecosystem plenty of different actors, the governments, of course, but also companies, citizens, and other research, universities, and so on and so forth. Is there maybe, how much value do you see in the other actors of this change? And is there maybe one of these actors which we would like to highlight as being really at the core of the transformation towards data ecosystem and data sharing?
Okay, I don't know that there's a sort of shining example of this. I think that the thing to get through is the point that you made at the beginning, Pierre-Adrien, that this is really new, right? Or at least the new way that we're doing this is really new, right? The different way that we're doing this now. Everybody's trying to figure this out. And I think the important thing is to try, right? And we will all learn as we go forward. And the challenges are going to be unique in every case, and they're frequently going to sort of refer to either local law or organizational dynamics of the organizations involved. And these need to be managed. And we need to start having sort of sharing lessons learned about how these are managed. I think that's where we are. I would say if there's sort of a top line piece, if we're looking at policy, it's not clear. I would have the question as to whether or not policy allows for the kind of trust enabling technologies to be used on government data like I described earlier. I'm not sure that it does. I know this is something that we're working on through our Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. But it's not always that. Sometimes it's, one story that I'll share quickly, and before I cede my time, I heard from a IT services firm who had a client that was in the food and beverage industry, made beer, that the piece of data they really wanted was what people consumed with the beer that the company made. Right, that would allow them to tweak the taste, work on that sort of thing. But the distributors and the restaurants and the grocery stores had that data. And there was a powerful faction inside the company that didn't want to turn those folks who were customers into suppliers, because that would have changed the relationship with that organization. It would have hurt the bottom line of the chief commercial officer. It would have made people inside the beverage company lose power and others gain power. And that stuff crops up everywhere I think within governments, perhaps more especially because there's not a profit motive. So this is the kind of thing we need to run through.
Just one last question, because you said, yeah, we need to enter the game of data sharing and to enter this field. It's to try to get to the attempt. This needs to go, I guess, with hand in hand with digital data trust, with some kind of clear trust by a technical trust that is operationalized, but also a societal trust that is the acceptance of the citizen, and also that everyone plays along. Now, in the OECD pillars, Barbara, you mentioned the trust to be fostered was one of the key pillars. Could you just briefly conclude this panel with saying where you think we are right now in the world where it comes to data trust, digital trust? Do you feel like we didn't enter yet the game, or we are on a good way? What's your feeling?
I think we are finally aware that there's an issue with trust, and data trusts or the conditions to support the sense that the public, for instance, can trust how the different actors use their data. When I say use, I mean access, share, and reuse the data. It's a big concern. I think, so to answer your question, at least we are aware of it. I think government started taking actions in relation to this concern, because they do acknowledge that it's important in relation to their legitimacy. The OECD published also the good practice principles on the ethical use of data. I think there's a important momentum, again, especially if we link the use of artificial intelligence with the use of data in relation, for example, to public service design and delivery, to actually foster and push and nudge governments to take more concrete actions. Because again, the fact that we are all aware doesn't mean we have come to solve the problem, but at least there's a big awareness on the importance of putting trust and all different actions that can be taken in that sense at the core of the conversation.
Yes, and I feel indeed that the topic of establishing guidelines and the topic of building these guidelines into projects, into an ecosystem, this is really a different conversation indeed.
So, and if I can say just one more thing, I think it's also a matter of culture. So it's a very, didn't touch upon a number of issues here, but having the skilled and talented people within the public sector who can support trustworthy use of data is not just about having data scientists, but is about creating a culture that acknowledges the importance of trust as well when it comes to data use.